Hi everyone, it's Ardith, and I'm back today with the second video in my series about mass-producing cards for my church Christmas card project. I've linked the January video above in case you're interested in hearing more about how the project works and why I'm making so many cards. I've also linked the blog post below. Like last month, I'll keep track of the time so you can see exactly how long it takes me to make these cards. I think you'll be surprised at how quickly it goes once the design is finalized. I forgot to get the clock out initially, but the timestamp on my first clip was 10:24. By that time, I had already created a practice card, so let's call it a 10 o'clock start. And that's my first tip for this month. If you're using a new or unfamiliar technique, test it out first. I wanted to create a stripy night sky with Reinkers, and I tried a couple of colored combinations before settling on one. I also tested a couple of dyes. I knew that a nativity die would be intricate, but I did find that another one in my stash was more difficult to use than this one from SugarPea Designs. It had more bits that needed to be poked out, and while that's fine for a one-off card, I don't have time for that when I'm making 36 of them. And that leads to my next tip: do some math. I knew that if I positioned the white die cut properly, I wouldn't need a full panel of night sky behind it. And that would mean that I could get more night skies out of one full sheet of cardstock. 6 in this case, instead of 4. As I said, my background was created with 3 Catherine Pooler Reinkers in blues and purples and a baby wipe. I folded the baby wipe up several times and simply put a few drops of each color onto it. Then I got out 6 sheets of my white cardstock, just regular Neenah 80 pound. And this means I'll be able to make 36 night skies. Tip number 4 is that if you're creating a background, do it on a full sheet and cut it down later, rather than the opposite. I'm swiping the color onto each sheet of cardstock, just going back and forth until I'm happy with the coverage, and it's taking me no more than about 30 seconds to get the ink down onto each sheet. If I had done this individually, it would take longer and I might have ugly edges on each one. Doing it this way means that if I have ugly edges, I can trim them off before trimming my sky panels to size. Before I moved on to the next panel, I pulled out some distress spray and brushed pewter, and I used the spray tube to splatter drops over top. This will add a bit of shine and some stars to my night skies. I added more ink to my baby wipe for each new sheet of cardstock, and I got different colors and levels of coverage on each one. That one baby wipe made it through all 6 of my panels, but you can see that my fingers got really inky. You can wear gloves if that's something that bothers you. I also got better at making the splatters smaller by wiping off the end of the tube on the bottle before tapping it onto my finger. I set the panels aside to dry while I worked on some of the other elements. First, the card bases. I cut 36 of them from some old Stampin' Up! Concord Crush cardstock. This is a nice deep purple that is almost navy blue, and it'll go really well with my night sky panels. I scored them all at 4 1/4 inches. Then I folded and burnished them. And then I stamped them with my personalized stamp using white ink since the cardstock is so dark. Here's a close-up of my trimmer. It's very big, so it won't fit completely on screen, but there are a number of features that it has that really help me with mass production. First, it has this positionable guide. I can line the guide up along the measurement I need and then just jam my cardstock up against it to get the perfect and consistent size every time. No need to think or measure each time. Second, the blade is self-sharpening. If I ever feel like it's not sharp enough, I just run it up and down along the metal edge without any cardstock, and it sharpens itself. I've had this trimmer for over 10 years now, and I still love it. The only thing it's not great at is small pieces, like a 2 by 2 inch square. Once you get too close to that protective plastic piece, it's hard to hold the cardstock so that it's straight. And now I'm finished cutting all my white pieces for die cutting, and I've already cut the night skies as well. Everything's ready for my next step. Now, I need to choose a sentiment, and I've pulled out a few of what I call my nativity sets that have sentiments I think might work. By the way, I keep my nativity or religious Christmas sets separate from the rest of my Christmas sets, and I never purge them. A lot of my nativity sets are retired or even from companies that don't exist anymore. For testing, I think about size and the feeling that I think the focal image has. In this case, I think it's quiet and peaceful, maybe just before everyone realized that baby Jesus has arrived, and they got all joyful. Anyway, I worked my way through my selection, and I chose this one that says, "The Lord has come," from an old Avery L. retired set. I like the size and simplicity of it, and I also like that it's a little unusual, and that it's the second half of the Joy to the World lyric. I used the practice die cut to help me decide where to position the sentiment for stamping. I didn't want it too close to the die cut itself because I may not be able to cut it consistently in the same place, so some extra room means that I'm less likely to end up cutting into the words. And then I just stamped them all. I tell you, a MISTI is definitely my all-time #1 tip for making multiples. Not only does it stamp it in the exact same spot on each card, but if I ever have a problem with bad stamping, I can do it again and get it perfectly lined up. Now let's take a quick look at how this will line up and how much space I have for die cutting. Looking at the die cut will help me plan how to best position it. This one has the star as a separate piece included over the top, so it means I can't use it for inlaying, but it's really handy not to have to cut the star separately. Also, for horizontal positioning, I can see that the little windows in the buildings are going to need to be popped out individually each time I die cut, so I'm going to try and minimize the number of buildings I include. To save me using liquid glue on these tiny areas, which will take time and likely be a little messy, I'm going to use this 2.5-inch Be Creative tape on the back of each of the white panels. Since this is something I don't always do, I want to test how it works before I commit to all 36 of them. I got out my Gemini Junior sandwich, and I'm including the metal shim in it, since this die cut is intricate and it has that tape on the back. I also used purple tape to hold it in place, and don't worry, I used a lot less of it for the rest, and then figured out what I learned from the process. First, this Be Creative tape works great for the die cut panel. All the pieces I don't want stay in the die, and I basically peel off the release paper and it becomes a big sticker that's super easy to work with. Second, I'll use less purple tape, and also, it's important to take it off first to make it easier to remove the rest of the bits. Third, I can use my finger to stick to the back of the star to release it from the die, and then position it where I want it in the night sky. Before I move to the next one, I need to pop out all those other bits that I don't need, and at first I used my craft pick, which worked great, although it was a little fiddly because those pieces are sticky on the back. So I'm thinking this process is a go. I'll just attach all the night skies to the card bases before I start the die cutting. And just a quick note that for each card, you have the opportunity to decide if there's an area that you want to have hidden under the white die cut area. And here's all the cards. At this point, I've already identified my favorite one that will be featured in my photos. I usually just put a sticky note on it so it doesn't get lost as I finish up the cards. Next, I'm going to put the Be Creative tape on the backs of all the white pieces. And I have 2 minor tips from this process. You'll notice that I started using my small scissors to cut the tape. That took 2 snips each time. After a while, I switched to my large scissors, and that took 1 snip. 1 less movement. I used the pile of pieces and the grid on my work surface to help me loosely measure each piece of tape. Also, I started with the pile of panels face up, but that meant turning each one over. Eventually, I flipped the whole pile over. Another unnecessary movement eliminated. Now it's time for the die cutting. There's no getting around the fact that this is going to be the most time-consuming part of this card assembly, even though I've taken as many planning steps as I can think of to ensure that it goes as quickly as possible. Because the die cut is so intricate, I have to be very careful with it each time I pull it out of the die. But like many processes, I got into a groove and it started to get easier and faster. And almost immediately, I had one process improvement. I could use the purple tape to remove the little windows from the die, much faster than the craft pick. Also, I did have a couple where the die cut ripped. All I did was assemble the card as normal, and then I add the little ripped part to the proper place. No one will ever know. And another funny thing, by using my finger to lift the stars out of the die, my finger actually got cleaner over time, and that ink disappeared, probably with a couple of layers of skin. As I continued, I found that the purple tape wasn't always able to get those little windows out, so I also tried using scraps of the Be Creative tape, which worked better most of the time. I did keep my craft pick nearby as my backup. Here I'm showing you that I have 12 cards done, and let's see, it's 12:20. only 2.5 hours after I started. Now I've got 24 done, and it's 12:40. And finally, all 36 done, and it's 1:10. I still have a bit of cleanup to do, but let's call that 10 o'clock to 1:30. 3.5 hours to get 36 cards done. Not bad. I hope you've enjoyed this video and got some good tips. It doesn't have to be multiples of Christmas cards you're making. Could be invitations for weddings, showers, or parties too. I'll be back next month with another card design and more tips, but so far I'm feeling very good about staying on top of this project, which is very important to me. Please let me know below if you have tips that you use for mass production, or if you see any suggestions for improvement in my mass production. I'd love to learn how to make my processes even more efficient. Product links are below and also on my blog. Thanks so much for watching. See you next time.